As a paroled convict runs off the road and lays dying, he tells a group of random onlookers checking in on him where he stashed $350,000 in cash for the taking, setting off a ruthless competition between them to get to the money first. In Stanley Kramer's 1963 epic comedy, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And that's the movie we're uncovering this week on Movie Bones.
Look, there's this dough, see? There's all this dough. 350 G's in the park in Rosita. It's in this box, buried under this big W. You'll see it. You'll see it under this big W. I tell you, I'm giving it to you.
That's the voice of Jimmy Durante playing Smiler Grogan. He's the instigator of the race that follows to find $350,000, or around $350 million today. There's no complex plot to the movie to describe here. More or less, it's just rampant human greed and all the effects of that spilling out through one of several unique characters. And I think for a movie like this, it's all in, kind of how well the actors take to that material and make it their own. And this is a movie I've seen, going back to my childhood. This is one I have seen before, but my parents had this on VHS tape. Going as far back then, I would say that I still recognize that that's something that they succeeded in then. And I'm going to hold to that today, I think, even after watching it again just recently. But I know you're new to this film, although not new to the concept. What do you think, man? How did you, what are your first impressions of this?
Okay, so, I'm new to this particular movie, but I'm not new to this type of movie. And we'll talk more about types of movies that kind of follow a sort of pattern like this in a little bit, but I knew this, I did not know this, or I didn't remember this anyways, that a movie called, by the title, Rat Race.
It had a Whoopi Goldberg or something in it too. I kind of vaguely remember this.
I know Rowan Atkinson. Is that the right name?
Yeah.
Was in it?
Yeah, Rowan Atkinson. Mr. Bean.
Yeah, so I had seen that movie, and that movie came out in 2001. It has Rowan Atkinson, John Cleese. Yeah, it does have Whoopi Goldberg, Cuba Gooding Jr., Seth Green, just like an ensemble cast. And yeah, so I had seen that movie. I had remembered it. That movie, anyways, was based off of or a sort of remake of It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, where there's a similar premise. Although I think it's more of an actual, in Rat Race, it's an actual competition that they're on or something like that. But it's a similar premise.
You dangle, basically you dangle a metric ton wad of money out there for people to get, and you just set them after it like a rat race, or in this case, it's ill-gotten loot that a whole bunch of people happen to find out about all at the same time. I could see all different kind of ways can go wrong, because something like this must be like wrangling. It's a complex enterprise trying to put together this many actors who are all well known, and trying to just have some fun with it at the same time, but putting a huge investment into it. And we can get into some of the other aspects to it. For example, like the stunt work in this film, in Mad, Mad World. It's pretty astonishing when you think about some of the things that they do. First of all, did you like it? Because either you like this movie or you don't.
Yeah, I do like this type of movie. I do like this brand of movie. You're right. You're either going to like it or you're not going to like it. Because it does not, beyond what the plot is, that's it.
It's not complicated.
It's not complicated. There's not really a lot of character growth.
Oh no,
in my opinion, and it's some of that I think is because of the just, you just got so many characters you're having to deal with and at any given moment. And this movie, it does a thing where it keeps adding characters. At the end, you're being introduced to new characters. And they're just there for a little bit, but they play sort of important parts in the movie. And so you're like, okay. So it's you're not looking for, if you're going into this movie asking yourself, am I going to be rewarded with some kind of deep meaning, character growth where I see a character go from point A to point B? Quite literally, there's one character that you could maybe have an argument that does something like that. And even that,
If you're reaching for
you're
something.
going, I wouldn't say reaching for something necessarily. I would say like you could probably guess it if you're paying enough attention to the movie.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the same person.
Possibly, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I liked it. I like it. It's a funny movie. The action sequences I thought were really funny and well done for what they are. I mean, there's a whole scene where like one of the characters is fighting these other two guys and they tear down a whole entire garage. And like obviously, like at that point, if at that point you were taking this movie seriously, you'd have to ask yourself like,
why?
Well, it becomes a cartoon.
Yeah,
I mean that whole sequence is a cartoon sequence, and it's just well done for live action. So I mean, it's an enjoyable film.
It's really well choreographed. As a kid, I always really kind of glommed onto that scene because it was probably one of the even more cartoonish of all the scenes in the movie, among many scenes which you could count and qualify that way. As an adult, looking over some of the other scenes, some of the things I didn't appreciate as much as a kid, it's like they actually fly an actual plane through a billboard. And I'm like, that actually happened. They didn't, that's not CGI, folks. There's no CGI. This is 60s. None of that's going on. They actually flew a plane through a billboard. And as I looked into the details of that particular stunt, it was supposed to be made out of paper, but they didn't. It made it out of canvas, and it almost wrecked the plane. It's like it actually did some damage to the plane, which it wasn't intended to do. The same plane is then flown all the way through a very low hangar, which is incredibly dangerous. I mean, I can't imagine that this is like life-risking stuff for, a pretty broad comedy. And it's like, but it works. It's like, as an adult, I'm looking at this and it's like, it's entertaining, yes. It's well shot, yes. But it's also hugely risky for the people filming it. And you just don't see that anymore, especially with the age of CGI. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Because how much this movie would have been CGI if it was done in this day and age? Quite a bit of it.
Yeah. And it wouldn't have been as impressive for it either, though. That's the thing.
Yeah. And that's maybe why this type of movie doesn't super exist anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's going to be super expensive. It's practical. Everything in this movie is a practical effect.
Yes.
And because it's a practical effect, you wouldn't get something like that in this day and age. And that's not to, we're not knocking movies in this time period. It's just, it's just the reality of the situation.
Yes. The only not physical effect that I could peg throughout the entire movie is the one they use over and over again with the rear view, the rear projected images of stuff going on behind the vehicle. So if you have actors in the vehicle, they're not actually on the road. They're acting in front of a screen that's projecting the moving stuff behind them.
Yeah.
But that's it. That is absolutely the only one I could peg. And some of the car stunts that they do in this film, and yes, it's not the real actors being there. They have the cameras pulled away so you can't see the close-up of their faces, but it doesn't matter because you're focusing on these real cars crashing into each other and the way it's shot too. So that's one of the big things I noticed this time around as an adult. As a kid, you just kind of ha, 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 it's all funny, it's all funny stuff. And then having other things like nowadays CGI that makes things feel lightweight or makes them feel kind of unreal and there's no real threat is one of my big criticisms actually of movies like Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull compared to previous entries in that series, where it was a lot more practically done. There's a style of comedy which prevents it from just being kind of straight up slapstick. And I'll give you some examples of what that is here.
I have some medical experience. I'm a dentist. Do you think you're hurt real bad?
Is he kidding?
That's him! That's him! I'll catch you! I'll kill you! I tell you, I'll kill you! You dirty robber! Someone you know?
It's that kind of here's an over-the-top, really broad thing that's happening, and you could leave it at that, but there's always this kind of understated reality. There's always some kind of understated person there to state the obvious in a very understated way. And it just kind of highlights just how absurd it is. And that happens over and over again in the movie. And it is one of the things I do kind of like as an adult even. It prevents it from just being too bland, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because this movie could have been just a very bland movie. Like we're saying, these characters don't have a lot of depth to them, but it's just like the depth that they do have, it's used to its fullest extent, and it makes the characters unique. And you kind of want to, like, when it's going away from them, you kind of want to go back and go, I wonder what they're doing now, or I wonder how they're getting along.
I will say that the film does do a good job of bouncing back and forth to make sure you keep track of where everyone is. It does play into a bit of my one criticism of the film, in that in order to do that at times, they do a thing where it's like some of the characters find planes. And well, that's a great idea. It's intuitively logical, because if you're kind of in this race and you're going to try and want to do that, it does mean you have to do something when they get there, because now they're so far ahead, you have to explain why they just don't get there first. And with both those sequences that do this, both with the, was it Buddy Hackett and Mickey Rooney, where I do have something positive to say about that too, but their characters, they end up spending so much time in the air. It is a bit like chewing over chewed gum after a while. It does take a while to get there. They do milk it for all it's worth, but then they milk it a couple extra times when it's like, okay, this is a 2.5 hour movie, okay? And this is what's an epic comedy. And part of the epicness in this case, I think, would have been less epic on that score. The other one, it's like the husband and wife, the dentist and his wife, was played by Sid Caesar and Edie Adams. I can't think of their names right offhand. They get there way ahead of everybody else. And the way they explain that away is like why they don't get there first is they get locked into a basement at a hardware store while trying to get picks and shovels to dig up the treasure. Okay, but in order to keep coming back to them, you keep coming back to the same location and the same kind of like, now what are they going to try now to get out? And what are they going to try and do now to get out? And it does kind of escalate. And Sid Caesar does play it. I will give him credit. He does a good job of playing it for all it's worth. It does kind of, you feel the length of the time a little bit more in those sequences. It's not a killer at all. But I've always noticed this, even I think when I was watching it as a kid, it's like those scenes tend to drag on a little bit too long.
Yeah. I think it's because, like, while everyone's dealing with their own story, those two sets of characters are not interacting with the other sets of characters that are in the movie.
Yes, that's another good point.
It brings them, like, it takes them out of it a little bit until, finally, obviously the movie brings them all back together in, the climax.
Yes.
The first climax of the movie and everything. But I mean, yeah, because they're on their own. And the only real thing that we have connecting them is the police. They don't even know that the police are watching them. It's just like, that's the only way we know that they're still feels like they're a part of the movie at that point, is because, like, oh, the police are watching them and taking, making sure, knowing what they're doing and everything.
Yeah. And to what you said there is like what keeps the interest in the other pairings is that they're constantly reintegrating with each other. They're splitting apart and coming back together more frequently. So you've got like, Ethel Merman's mother-in-law and, with her daughter, they get separated and he pairs up with, Nigel Hawthorne, which he's one of my favorites, Terry Thomas playing, Nigel Hawthorne, the collector of cacti from England. And I say, it's like they run into each other. They get split off. And his brother-in-law, Mr. Finch's brother-in-law, who's crazy, and I love him too.
Mama!
It's like, Mama, that's why you had me, Mama, so I could save you, Mama. And so you've got all these things happening, and those are some of my favorite parts of the whole movie is seeing that they're back and forth. I like Phil Silvers. He plays the slimy sleazeball. Oh, good golly. And of course, Jonathan Winters as Mr. Pike, the truck driver too. They're all really good at what they're doing. These really were the comedic legends of their time.
Yeah, and when I said earlier that they play their roles to the T, oh my goodness, mother-in-law. There was that mother-in-law so many times. I was like, please, just someone dump her beside the road, just leave her.
And now for me, it's like, I don't know how you can disagree with me on this, but this is the apex predator of all mother-in-law characters.
Yeah,
and the only reason that works is because she is the apex predator, and there can be only one, because that's what apex predator is. You're at the top of the food chain. And that's why it works. And that's why every other iteration of mother-in-law characters I have severe criticisms for, but I will make that exception for her.
She does a good job. But yeah, the character itself, like just that character, you're wanting the whole time, like, just please just drop her.
Well, there's a reason why that the movie ends with basically a punchline at her expense. you know. And it is, and if you're going to end the movie, it's like that's the one thing they all had in common is they hate her. Every single one of them down to, except for Sylvester, of course, who's still worried about his mother. You had to have him as the exception too. It's that comedic exception, you know, the mama's boy.
Gotta tell me it don't make any difference.
For heaven's sake, tell him.
It don't make any difference.
That guy's dead. You better believe it.
Best death scene ever? Actually kicking the bucket. And it's so on the nose that it wraps all the way around and comes right back around to being gut-busting. And, you know, and it's like, it shouldn't work, but it did. I will say that it's one of my favorite death scenes. It stuck with me, again, since I was a kid. Do you have any personal favorites? Of all the cast, do you have any personal favorites?
I don't know. Like, personal favorites, I don't know if I could call them personal favorites because most of all the characters are just kind of like, you know what I'm saying? It's like the mother-in-law. They're all just so annoying in their own way that you want to see them all lose. I did like the, what's his name? I'm not good with the names of the characters in this movie. I did like the Hawthorne character. Is it Hawthorne or is
Nigel
it
Algernon Hawthorne?
Yeah. I like Hawthorne. I thought that character was really funny. He also kind of reminded me of Nigel Thornberry from the Wild Thornberrys, a Nickelodeon show. But I mean, it just felt so close to the way they talked and everything. Because I liked his fighting scenes, the truck driver guy.
Okay, yeah. Jonathan Winters as Lenny Pike, yeah. The guy who plays, now here's a bit of trivia for you. If you found Terry Thomas's, voice familiar, it might be because you saw him in Disney's Robin Hood. Or heard him, rather. Not saw him. Heard him.
I saw that, or I had seen that, and I was like, oh, okay. I do want to kind of point out, like, in a movie like this, because of like what we've been saying, there's a lot of, there's so many characters and everything. I do think one weakness of this movie, unfortunately, is kind of our two other female lead characters, other than the mother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of thought, like, honestly, in their own way, I was like, if you switch these characters around, they're the same character.
Yeah, pretty much. They're kind of left behind with not much to do aside from just being there, And it's a shame because I know, at least when it came to the dentist's wife, Edie Adams, who is the real-life wife of Ernie Kovacs, if you guys are, we talked about Ernie Kovacs in another episode, but she was the real-life wife of Ernie Kovacs, and she was pretty gifted as a straight woman, in comedic timing and all that. She was very good at it. So she's got this natural talent, but they just don't tap into that, She is given something to say toward the end, and we'll get to that too. There is what I think is a little bit of a moment of, and kind of deeper meaning to the movie, if you want to call it that, as deep as a movie like this can get. And we'll get to that later, but she's part of that too. She's a gifted actress, and I don't know that much about the one who played, I guess, Mrs. Finch. But both of them, but like I said, they both could be interchangeable for the way the movie treats them throughout like 99.99% of the movie.
Why, that's it! Sure! Look! It's a big W, I tell you! It's a big W!
I'm sorry, Mrs. Finch. I'm afraid it's too late. I think they found it.
Well, it's a nice dream. Lasted almost 5 minutes.
There's an example of this, the one time, and maybe because she was kind of hanging off in the background and she wasn't doing pretty much of anything. And she was pretty disgusted, I guess, with everyone else's, greed and all that. But she's allowing herself that one moment of to dream for like she said, for 5 minutes. And it kind of does underscore when that 5 minutes is up, it highlights that tantalizing, fleeting euphoria of chasing material wealth and followed by misery. It rings pretty true that if there's a lesson for this movie, it's to not bother with chasing those material things of the world and just to rather chase things that last, things that are eternal, that don't cost you anything. Because in that case, you're more likely to find actual happiness with an easy reach than you will trying to, wring yourself out for a few extra bucks, right?
Yeah. And see, I think that's like one of the things about the movie that I kind of wish it had ended on her taking it and running away. I thought that would have been kind of neat and everything. It didn't do that, and I think the ending was fine. Like, I'm not against the ending at all, but, if it had happened that way, I'd have been like, that's a satisfying ending because, all of a sudden it takes on this deeper meaning just for a little bit, and then it fleetingly runs away.
Perhaps it could have, I suppose, if it was handled right. I think for me, it would have been kind of difficult to avoid making kind of, having all this go to justifying the actions in some way. But good in the hands of a good director, they might have been able to pull that off too. So I can't say for one way or the other. As it was, it did provoke some deeper thought in me. So. So where are you going to come down on this, man?
I think this might belong in a museum. Yeah. And that's because, it's a unique film. There's actually, we were talking about this prior to the podcast starting here, that there's, there doesn't feel like there's a lot of these, but there actually is. It's like its own unique little genre. I'm going to say this started the genre. In movies that I would put in, this category that's you have this ensemble of characters that are doing things like this or, racing in a way, it's a Mad Mad World. You've got this, you've got Wacky Races, you've got The Great Race. Again, that's 2 years after this. And then I'd also put movies like Cannonball Run.
Yes, I was just thinking of that too.
Cannonball Run and Smokey and the Bandit. I'd put that in in these categories as well. And it kind of ends there. There's a movie that I almost want to put into this category. It's not really about racing. It's just about, something like this happening. But I've not seen the movie, so I cannot actually say if that's the case. But it's another ensemble movie. It's called Tag, and it's about friends who have been playing this ongoing game of tag all of their lives and everything. But I don't know, so I'm not going to spend any time talking about that. But because of this type of movie, and then Rat Race in the future, and then all of the things that we've talked about in between, it's its own unique genre of film. And because of that, it belongs in a museum. You should watch it, but you're coming out of all these movies entertained.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't have to think deeply. You can just enjoy the moment.
Just sit back and be in the moment. I think for me, and now I'm going to show a little bit of my bias, I think, because I was kind of where you are with this. It's like the only reason I think I contemplated putting it in a museum was because of the length and some of the issues we talked about with the length. It's a bit of a time commitment. And a lot of movies that just sell themselves as popcorn fluff movies, be in the moment type thing, they often tend to be a lot shorter. They often tend to be among the shorter movies, barely clocking in at maybe an hour and 20, an hour and 30 minutes. But this one adds a full extra hour. So I did have to weigh that in my estimate. But at the end of the day, it's the quality of stuff that's good is so good that even if it drags in a couple places, I just couldn't. And maybe it's because I have that sentimental piece from my childhood where my parents had the VHS tape and would pull it out every now and then, is that I'm going to bump this up to a trust me. It was on the line, but I'm going to say trust me in this one. So anyway, that's our verdict. And so now's the time when we'd like to remind the listening audience out there that if you're watching these movies alongside us, and you should be, and hearing our reactions, please do like, subscribe, comment, and of course, follow us on your podcast purveyor of choice. Tell us what you think we got all wrong because, we're not perfect. Maybe nominate some films you'd like us to see do, especially if they're available for free. In fact, only if they're available if they're free because these adventures come with no strings attached, guaranteed. In any case, Ryan and I thank you for sticking with us on this shared journey. We have a movie coming up next week, don't we?
Yes, our next movie is starring Bela Lugosi, Basil Rathbone, and Tor Johnson. It's titled The Black Sleep. Now, Tubi says, and we're saying Tubi says because sometimes Tubi tells us things and it's not entirely correct, although we appreciate Tubi for its freeness. So we're not going to complain too much about it. But Tubi says, in B-movie legend Bela Lugosi's final film, a mad scientist experiments on his kidnapped victims in the search for a cure.
That sounds like such a unique concept, man. Never heard of it before.
Yeah.
That is sarcasm, folks. Yeah, so that's what we're going to be doing next week. But in any case, I think that wraps for today's show. Nothing left to say, but, we'll see you guys next week. And Brian, I'll see you next week.
All right.
All right.
Are you English? Just answer me. Are you English? Yes, as a matter of fact, I am. Why, don't you like the English?